capital plans. As you may or may not know, I prepared this RFQ with a lot of input and participation from Kelly and Mario. It is my understanding that of the two respondents, there are potential conflicts that both Kelly and Mario have personally with members of each of those responsive firms. Because this is a public meeting and Kelly was involved in procurement, and there's some argument she's a public officer under those state ethics laws, she does need to disclose her conflict for the record. And then we'll move on from there.
I have a conflict of interest with an employee of Dewberry with personal relationship.
Okay, that's sufficient for now. What that means is that we can proceed in a couple of different ways here, and so this again will be up to the committee what it wants to do. But because both Mario and Kelly have had their sort of fingerprints on this procurement, I feel like we can go forward how it is, and everybody just sort of knows that those conflicts are out there. You can continue to rank them 1 or 2. If you're not comfortable doing that, I think another way to at least protect Mario and Kelly from this point on would be to make a finding or recommendation that both firms are equally qualified, and that another level of review is necessary before you can make a final recommendation. And I think the only way to really, that secondary review would be cost, where they both compete to submit sort of the lowest price for these services, for the scope of services.
Would they use this information, or would be something else be produced that they would then use their bid for?
I think you'd have to write a more detailed scope of services so that it's an apples to apples proposal, because now you're going to proposals, and I think you need a pretty detailed scope of what you want. Get the proposal, and then in that situation, if both firms are evenly qualified, then if they meet the requirements in the proposal thing, then it's going to be a cost issue.
Well, I guess we do need to talk about are both qualified.
Well, and I have a question too, and I know this picking hairs, but the first thing I noticed when I looked at ZHA's was that they didn't have the addendums in the form that you had asked for, and I think they did address it in the letter, and you know, that's fine, but I guess if it came down to it, I mean, I looked at them both and I thought they were equally qualified. If I had to, I would have thrown this one out based upon that. And that's just me, and it doesn't really have anything to do with their work per se, or necessarily, I don't know, but to me it was every other packet had it in there. So it seemed to me pretty clear, yet even though they addressed it in the letter, they chose not to put it in there, and I didn't quite understand that. That's just me. And I certainly wouldn't throw them out just because of that. But if it came down to having to pick between one of the two, that would probably be one thing that might throw me in the direction of Dewberry.
And on that point, there is language on both sides to go either direction with that sort of procedural defect. There's language that requires all the required forms to be submitted to be considered as a responsive bid. You also have the authority to waive irregularities and informalities in the bid package. So,
yeah, as a matter of practice, when we do construction bids, on the bid form, they have to acknowledge the addendums. We also require them to acknowledge the addendum by signing it and including it with their bid package. And on occasion, they don't have it. And I don't know about Mark, but in the 23 years I've been here, we have never thrown somebody, if they acknowledge, as long as they acknowledge it someplace, we've never thrown them out. So that's just it's a judgment call, what you want to do. And you know, like if Tyndall Oliver left off the letter on his is because of a clerical error, you know, does that affect their work product or not? And those are just judgment calls for each individual committee member to make. But,
right.
But if it was acknowledged somewhere, when we take a bid, as long as we know that they have it we'll accept it.
And they did have
if they didn't acknowledge it on the bid form or submit them there, we would have a problem.
And they did acknowledge it in their letter. So, I mean, if it doesn't bother anybody else, I'm fine with that.
I'm used to seeing stuff get left out of bid packages as long as it's covered somewhere. I mean, it happens, but
I guess I'm an eye daughter. And 2 + 2 = 4.
Show off.
Sometimes 3.9.
Were there any other concerns about the bid packages in terms of responsiveness?
Not for me. I think they're both competent.
Yeah.
I do too, and I liked your suggestion because there's personal issue for two principals here and two principals involved in these projects, I kind of do like maybe the RFP approach, but I do agree with Al and Mel that you probably have to widen the scope.
I think it'd be cleaner and simpler for everybody involved.
Well, I think I do. I think I agree with you. I think the scope needs to be a little bit more finite because, again, it'll be Mario and Kelly who ultimately will be looking at any of these invoices to sort of approve for payment, and that makes them vulnerable. So to the extent we can make it as precise as possible.
If you have a detailed request for proposals, then you remove the subjective part of the decision.
Right. Agreed.
You define it up front.
So it won't be perfect. Obviously, Kelly will still need to be involved in preparing that scope. I don't know that there's an obvious way around that. But if we have Kelly prepare that scope and then take her off this committee, would the four of you still feel comfortable reviewing the responses to that RFP?
Well, I guess if it comes down to once the scope is defined and it's a matter of cost, unless
it's
they
just the
fail to meet
limit.
it's really open it up and it is what it
Read out
is.
the number.
Well, I think
Because
Mario.
I think you want to get away from the subjective part of it to avoid any problems.
Certainly it'll be easier. Certainly it'll be easier. But I think we do need to at least continue the evaluation committee so that we can keep Mario and Kelly out of it as much as possible.
Can I talk on the scope part or not?
Yeah, go ahead.
So would it be beneficial to have somebody review the scope for fairness if I write it, or?
Why doesn't she draft it and then just send it to all the committee members just for a comment? And that way everybody buys in and she's got some cushion there.
Okay, I think
It would
that's
seem like that would be, as long as everybody was comfortable with the scope of services, don't you think, Mel?
ultimately, I want a plan of action that is fair to your committee, fair to the city, and fair to the bidders.
Yeah.
We are changing the process midstream, but I do feel like in the end, it will be fair for everybody, and that's really, I think, the ultimate goal here.
Well, and I don't think it's fair for either one of these firms, given that each of both Kelly and Mario have a conflict with the other, if they both had a conflict with the same firm, then it's obviously heavily weighted to that firm. But since they each have a conflict with each of the firms, to me, it seems the fairest way, not just for our protection, but for them as well.
Okay.
What if they submit a condition bid, like, for instance, they plan on submitting 4 submittals instead of 5, and their number is lower? Would it be beneficial for us to just have Company A and Company B in the envelopes and not know who they are necessarily, and say, Company A said, we really only need 4 submittals. Company B said, we're going to give you 5 submittals.
You mean as far as how many packages they're going to return?
No, I'm just saying, like, if they interpret the scope of work a little bit different than the other firm does, and they put some clarifications in what their bid is, how are we going to...
I would say if the committee agrees on the scope, we don't accept anything
Right,
other than
no.
complying with the scope.
Unless they ask for an addendum
Well-
question period or
Well,
something.
But then both have the
that same
opportunity, right?
addendum would go to both firms to have a chance to modify it.
Yeah, I agree, thanks.
Okay.
Just so it's an equal basis, and no one says, I was planning on a construction period of 12 months, and the other guy planned on 11 months, his bid's lower, we didn't specify, then we have another issue.
Okay. All right. Kelly will prepare a scope. We'll run it by the committee. The recommendation for now, if I'm hearing correctly, is that both firms were responsive, are responsible, and otherwise qualified to proceed to the next step. Okay. Can somebody make a motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Mel?
Yes.
Kelly?
Do I vote?
Oh, no, you don't.
That's a trick.
It wasn't a trick.
Oh, my toes.
Thank you. Holly?
Yes.
Al?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay.
You almost...
Sorry, I apologize. Okay. All right. We will take the recommendations for A and B, obviously, to the council, and the next step will be to negotiate the agreements. I'm uncertain the order of March on the 3rd. I feel like just procedurally it will be appropriate to advise the council by memo that we're making the recommendation, this committee is making the recommendation that both are qualified. We go to an RFP and the process we described. Kelly prepares a scope, runs by the committee, and we just sort of lengthen that process and hold it out for another month or so while that happens.
Yeah, that's going to draw the process out a little bit longer. I don't know if it's a really tight time frame or not.
I don't know what we can do.
It is what it is.
The only issue there in that regard to me is that you've asked all three of these studies to work somewhat together.
And they'll
so
be-
can you really start these other, are you going to mess anything up, I guess, by starting the other two when the third one's not on board yet?
Maybe not. I don't know how much negotiation will be involved with either PFM or PRMG, since we sort of have agreements we've worked out with them in the past. But assuming there is still some negotiation, I would imagine we could tell them their start date.
It's going to be deferred.
Will
You
be
can get them under
deferred.
contract, but they'll have a deferred start date.
Right. And that's something I think we can work around and work with. And then there won't be much left to negotiate at all on this third one, so hopefully we'll just be good to go.
Are you going to do
Right.
a master services agreement and then give them a task or tasks as you go along? Or are you going to just try and give them a contract to do something now?
I don't know the answer to that yet.
Because if this, 3-4 years from now, you may have another need for financial stuff. And I don't know how, if it's that tightly worded to where, there's always a little
Right.
vague language in there. If the city has a need and you like the services they provide, you want to use them for something else.
I didn't envision that this would be sort of an ongoing professional service
So it's going to be an
contract.
agreement for a task and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other concerns? We'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Speedy.